Thank you very much, Professor Mariole. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I hope you're all doing well and healthy. My name is Leônidas Silva Júnior. I'm a professor at the Department of Linguistics at the State University of Paraíba, Brazil. First of all, I feel honored to be here, and I would like to thank Professor Mariole Mittman, on behalf of the Second Brazilian Prosody Conference Committee, made this invitation to present our special guest for this conference, Professor Volker Dellwo, whose research, along with other important scholars of this area, has been particularly grounded in my current research and projects. Dr. Volker Dellwo has a PhD in phonetics and communication sciences from Bonn University. He's an associate professor at the Institute for Computational Linguistics at Zurich University. He's also a member of the Acoustical Society of America, a chair member of the Center of Forensic Phonetics and Acoustics, member of the Center of Information Technology Society and Law, executive and research committee member at the International Association for Phonetic Sciences and Acoustics, member of the International Speech Communication Association, as well as an expert member of European Network of Forensic Science Institutes. Forensic Speech and Audio, besides being president and board member of Zurich Center of Linguistics. Dr. Dellwo is interested in research related to human and machine communication with speech, focusing on speaker-specific and lexical information in the speech signal and how humans and machines can use such information to recognize individuals applied to the areas of forensic phonetics. He ran more than 15 projects in acoustics and speech rhythm, speaker and voice identification for forensic purposes, voice and music, and voice quality. In the last 10 years, Dr. Volker Dellwo has more than 50 publications between conference contributions, proceedings, editor boarding, book chapters, journal papers, supervised dissertations, and so. He also developed some of the consecrated rhythmetrics largely used by the phonetic literature in L1 and L2 prosody, myself included in the use of these metrics. In his today's talk, presenting the conference Harmonicity as an indestructible rhythmic structural marker of speech, Dr. Dellwo will bring up evidences that harmonicity can be used to understand fundamental speech signal processing by human, or to understand how speech is chunked in different rhythmic units. Without further ado, please welcome Volker Dellwo.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very kind and nice introduction. And of course, thank you very much for the invitation. I suppose you hear me well, is that right? Yeah, perfect. Okay, good. Yeah. Thanks. So for the invitation to talk to you today here at this fantastic speech prosody conference. I saw some of the contributions. I think it's a really good conference that, and it's wonderful that it is accessible around the globe in online version now. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about harmonicity as an indestructible rhythmic structural marker of speech. When I read the title actually yesterday when I was putting the talk together, I thought maybe the title should have rather been something like harmonicity as an indestructible acoustic correlate of speech rhythm, maybe a little bit easier to understand. So basically, but I assume that you can see where it's going to. I want to convince you that harmonicity as an acoustic parameter is an acoustic measure that, or an acoustic dimension that can tell us something about the rhythmic structure of speech. And it's probably a dimension that has been overlooked so far. And I'm going to tell you a number of advantages here today that I think that harmonicity has over other ways that speech rhythm has very often been quantified. So let me go to see that the slides work. So first of all, let's start from a fundamental observation that speech rhythm is to a large degree encoded in the speech amplitude envelope. And pitching the talk today was probably a little bit, I didn't know how much background knowledge people have in concepts like amplitude envelope. So the first 10 minutes I'm going to spend on explaining some fundamental acoustic characteristics of the amplitude envelope. If you know about that area, this is going to be highly repetitive for you. But hopefully you can get something on top out of this. But so the actual harmonicity advantage will come after this introduction, basically. So here. What we see here in black, basically, or like in the center. Do you see my mouse when I'm pointing something here? Or I can probably also try and put that. Let me see, pointer options, laser pointer. So do you see that laser pointer when I'm pointing? Perfect. Okay, right. Yeah. So what you see here in the middle that everyone knows, I guess, it's a speech waveform. It's the amplitude over time, of course. And then on top of this here, you see the amplitude envelope of that speech waveform. And the amplitude envelope, you can just think of as a line that somehow connects the individual amplitude fluctuations, the rapid amplitude fluctuations that you get in that waveform here. And you actually see here the first peak actually doesn't fit precisely what I might have put a little bit, made a mistake here putting them together. You see here that like you see the interval, syllabic intervals of this particular waveform, and pretty much a peak here in the amplitude envelope corresponds somehow to a syllable, to a syllabic unit. And this is also why that amplitude envelope is very often used as an automatic measure to quantify syllables as well. So this amplitude envelope, and I abbreviate it with ENV here in the slides, it contains crucial information, crucial temporal information that contributes to speech rhythm. So it contains, for example, information about the centers of energy and how they are distributed over time. So you see whenever you get a peak that you get a high amplitude energy, and you see how these peaks are distributed over time. That's clearly one characteristic of the rhythmic structure of speech. You see the magnitude of the energy, so how much energy more or less, and you see the duration for a shorter one. The message that my internet connection is unstable. Is that right? Can you hear me? In case you have trouble, please speak up. Or is it? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Okay, right. Well, we'll see. But yeah. I mean, the message has now stopped, so probably it's fine again. But yeah, maybe that is a better. Wait, let me just organize my screen again. Now it's okay, good. So so basically, yeah, the amplitude envelope tells us a lot about the organization of the energy in the speech signal, and clearly something that contributes, and at least should contribute to the percept of speech rhythm. So what is rhythm? What is temporal information here? I would say temporal information, or I'm sort of clinging to a definition that Stuart Rosen proposed in 1992. There's an article I highly recommend reading you. It's been quoted hundreds and hundreds of times and influenced a lot of the perceptual work on speech rhythm. And Stuart Rosen basically proposed that there are three different types of temporal information in a speech signal. One is the amplitude envelope. That's the one that you see here. So the blue line overarching this waveform here. One is the periodicity. Yeah. So whether a signal is periodic or aperiodic, you see periodicity here. Whether we know basically that given that this signal here is periodic in the first part, it is a voiced signal, and the aperiodic one is an unvoiced signal. And then there is also the wave shape. I sort of amplified that here a little bit, or magnified it here a little bit rather visually. So that basically should show you the shape of the waveforms, that you can see the details of the waveforms that you can see here in this sort of more compressed graphical waveform here. And that basically shows us the so-called temporal fine structure. Yeah, so the fine structure information of the signal. So the amplitude envelope basically is a correlate of speech rhythm. That's also, when you look at that paper, is a sort of taxonomy that Stuart Rosen proposed, is like that we have tempo and rhythm mainly encoded in the amplitude envelope, also syllabicity in terms of the prosodic information. And if we go to segmental information, we find that there is some information about the manner of articulation in consonants in the amplitude envelope as well. But I'm not going to go into that today. So it's basically this prosodic information, tempo, rhythm, and syllabicity that the amplitude envelope encodes. Then periodicity, is relevant for voiceless distinction, and you see here then that is basically voicing and stress and intonation in the prosodic domain that we can distinguish with periodicity. And the temporal fine structure is responsible basically for all the frequency spectral characteristics. And so that contains a lot of information about formants, about where formants are placed, about the individual harmonics of the signal. So this gives us a lot of information segmentally about voicing place and voice quality, but prosodically, it's claimed here that it's there is no information. I would actually disagree with this here, but that's something we can discuss later. So when we talk about rhythm, basically rhythm is the overall percept of the individual temporal information or different temporal characteristics that make up a signal, like here, envelope, periodicity, and temporal fine structure. Okay, so which role does the amplitude envelope actually play in the perception of speech? There was a paper coming out that I put here on the like sort of a bit tilted on the side. There was a paper coming out by two authors, Licklider and Pollack, in 1947, I think it was, or 1948. Actually, this particular one. It's another one from 1946 in that context that is interesting. So there was a paper on this called The Effects of Differentiating, Integrating, and Infinite Peak Clipping on the Intelligibility of Speech. And basically what the authors were interested in is the phenomenon of infinite peak clipping that somehow removes the amplitude envelope from the speech signal. And they wanted to know, well, if we clip a signal infinitely, then is it still intelligible? Yeah? So what is infinite peak clipping more exactly? Here you see an example of a waveform on top here, and you see the temporal fine structure, you see the periodicity where it crosses the zero lines, yeah, and then we apply a simple formula in the digital domain. This is very easy today, so we just say, well, if a value here is larger than 0, we set it to 1. If a value of this wave is smaller than 0, so else, like for all other cases, we set it to -1. And what we receive basically is a square wave here, in which all the temporal fine structure is removed, in which all the envelope is removed because the envelope is 100% flat here, yeah. But that signal still contains the periodicity of this one here. And what people in the 1940s were interested in, they said, is such a signal still intelligible in terms of speech? Yeah. So I have on the next slide, I show you actually, I have 2 examples of this. So we're looking at this one here. Sorry, actually, I just see that the labels are wrong. So infinite peak clipping should be here on the left, and it says Hilbert TFS, that should be here on the right, but not to worry about right now. But so this is this infinitely peak clipped signal. And you see that was the speech signal that you see on top here before. And now I would like to know from you whether you think that is intelligible or not. So just put in the chat, please, yes, if you think that is intelligible, and say no, that is not intelligible. So it's about the signal here on the left. After we apply this infinite peak clipping procedure, please put in the chat whether you think. No. Oh, sorry. Yes, Veronica says here. Yeah, you can't hear it. No, you are not supposed to hear it right now. I first want to have your guess. Sorry, I should have made that clear. I first want to have your guess whether you think that a speech signal like that is intelligible, or whether you think that a speech signal like that is not intelligible. So put yes if you think it's intelligible. Put no. You only have these 2 answer options. So Livia says no. There are more people here. Veronica says no. Who else? Leonidas, no. Okay. Who else? Andre, no. Mariual, no. And Marcia says, I guess yes. Okay. The first yes we have. Right. That's probably it. So we have a bunch of answers. So someone else, like Dietmar, says yes. Hi, Dietmar. Actually, I couldn't hear. Yes, Leonia says I haven't played it yet, so I'm just asking you: is it intelligible? Is it not intelligible? What is a guess? So, and I'm going to play it to you now. Yeah. So I'm going to play it to you now. So and then you can hear what it is, whether you think it's intelligible or not. I don't know why it doesn't play. I guess I have to get rid of this pointer again to and I can't. Let me see. Oh, uncheck right on the, yeah, okay, thanks. Oh, yeah, that is it. So now comes the signal after it received an infinite peak clipping.
In this case, the easiest solution seems to appeal to the court.
So you understand it or you don't understand it? It's an English sentence.
In this case, the easiest solution seems to appeal to the court.
Intelligible or not?
In this case, the easiest solution seems to appeal to the court.
Okay, so most of you say that, like, I get a kind of, and most of you say yes. And Marcia was trying to write it down in this case, and then it goes on in this case.
In this case, the easiest solution seems to appeal to the court.
In this case, the easiest solution seems to appeal to the court. So I'm going to play you the original now.
In this case, the easiest solution seems to appeal to the court.
And then again, the infinitely peak-clipped one.
In this case, the easiest solution seems to appeal to the court.
And it's amazing, actually, how much information about the speech signal is still preserved, given that we got rid of all the temporal fine structure, we got rid of the amplitude envelope, and still this signal is actually pretty well intelligible. I put you a link underneath. If you are familiar with Pratt, I have a Pratt script where you can actually simulate this or carry out that process on your own computers, and just record a signal from yourself or take any signal that you have pre-recorded and run this scripts that you can get under this particular link. I'm going to give you the link to the slides actually afterwards, so you can download them and you can try all these links and you can play a bit around with this, and you will find, wow, it's actually amazing how well intelligible speech is still after such a brutal algorithm that has been run on it, or such a brutal degradation of the speech signal. You know? And on the right, you see another one. I told you here the labels are mistakenly confused. So on the right, this is actually this Hilbert temporal fine structure. So after it's done basically with a based on a Hilbert transform, and we multiply it with an inverse envelope of the speech signal. So we actually maintain the fine structure of the signal still, but we get rid of the envelope. And then the signal sounds a little bit more natural maybe, but also it doesn't change. So the intelligibility is still there. I'm going to play it.
In this case, the easiest solution seems to appeal to the court.
So that is basically the difference. Now we're having the fine structure, we're having the periodicity, but the envelope has gone.
In this case, the easiest solution seems to appeal to the court.
And again, there is a script here that you can try out and you can play around with this. And here's a paper also that Lei He here in the lab and myself did together on a Pratt algorithm that does this Hilbert transform, or gets you this Hilbert fine structure here. So you can play around with this. And if you want to understand more of this, I suggest then have a look at that paper. Yeah. So, but when Licklider and Pollack basically found this, that speech was still highly intelligible after the amplitude envelope was removed, they basically concluded that the envelope is irrelevant in speech processing, and people sort of bought that or followed this conclusion for probably something around 3 decades. Yeah, so everyone thought, well, for human perception and in automatic processing, amplitude envelope probably doesn't play any role, because when we remove it, then the speech signal is still intelligible. All the segmental, suprasegmental intonation contours are still, everything is there. So why bother about the amplitude envelope? And this was basically until the 1980s, when other researchers then looked particularly at the amplitude envelope contour and tried a new method, basically by saying, oh, we take the amplitude envelope contour and try to make speech intelligible based on that amplitude envelope contour only. So basically exhibiting predominantly temporal information from an amplitude envelope contour that they then filled with noise. And that process, I'm pretty sure most or all of you have heard about that, is referred to as noise vocoding. Yeah. So we take this amplitude envelope, instead of using that temporal fine structure from speech, we replace the temporal fine structure with just noise, like a noisy signal. Yeah. So, and they found if you do that for one single broadband, so if you get, I think I have it on the next slide exactly, if you get the amplitude envelope from just one speech signal, from a broadband speech signal, one amplitude envelope, then this is fully unintelligible. No. So I play you the signal here.
In this case, the easiest solution seems to appeal to the court.
Same one that we had before. And now I play you the amplitude envelope filled with noise.
In this case, the easiest solution seems to appeal to the
Sorry, actually, I have. This is already using more bands. I did a mistake here in the slides again. That you should just hear something like a pulsing noise, no? something like that. No? So because what you get basically at each amplitude envelope peak, you get a pulse of like a burst of noise, and the signal is absolutely non-intelligible from that. But then there was a little trick that they applied in that particular paper here, also Robert Shannon and colleagues, that they said, well, we don't calculate that amplitude envelope based on the entire bandwidth of the signal, but we split the frequency domain into a number of underlying bands, discrete bands, and then we calculate an envelope basically for each band and put these noisy signals back together. So we basically have only very rudimentary information about spectral cues in that signal. And that's what they did here. If you're not familiar with this, I recommend to you get that paper. And basically what they found is that when you split up the spectral band into one or two bands, or sorry, don't split it up so you only have one broadband, and then you split it up into two bands, you get the signals remain mostly non-intelligible. If you split it up into 3 or 4 bands, and in particular with 4 bands, you get a very, very high intelligibility under a number of different conditions. They had here like consonants, vowels, semitones, voicing, manner, place, information, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so you can actually see that you get quite a high intelligibility when you have at least 3 and better 4 bands. I have to say here, though, the listeners, they have to be familiarized with the type of speech. So they can't do it instantly. They have to adjust to this and practice a little bit with noise vocoded speech. Okay, so and on the next slide here, I have I just have a demonstration on how that would look. So basically, you take a full band signal, you split it up in a number of underlying bands, take the transfer that information in each band back to the to a waveform, like in the time domain, get the amplitude envelope and fill it with noise and put the signal back together again. So in a real signal, in a non-manipulated signal, non-noise vocoded signal, it sounds like this.
Während der Pause zum Teil müssen wir alle Leute aus dem Zuschauerraum rausschicken.
So this is the utterance that you hear, and I just play you 2 bands from that utterance. So this is a lower band filtered. Yeah, and this is a slightly higher band filtered. Yeah, so we could go through all the bands now, no, and then we're basically getting amplitude envelopes, fill them with noise, and then the bands sound like this. This is sort of low frequency noise pulsing. I think it's actually very low in amplitude here. I wonder whether you can hear it at all. But as I said, I'll give you the link to the slides afterwards, and you can listen to them there again. And this is a higher frequency band. Oh, you can hear it actually. So yeah, this was a higher noise pulsing that you heard. And again, there's a script for download if you want to try this on your own computer, and it's called vocoder basically, and it turns a speech signal or any signal you have, also music or what's an audio signal, into a vocoded signal, and you can choose the number of bands you want for this. So if you choose 2 here, you will get a signal that is very poorly intelligible, and from 4 bands in particular, when you practice a little bit, you should be able to understand these signals after a while. The more bands you choose, the better is the intelligibility of these signals. Yeah. Now I'm getting in the chat here a message. Please write your questions here. You can also ask questions directly to Professor after his talk. Absolutely, yes. You're also welcome. If there is anything that is not intelligible to you, or if the signal breaks off, please just interrupt me and I can explain something again. Yeah, so there's no problem. I know that maybe sometimes because of there's quite a distance that the signal travels, that maybe we're losing some of the speech here. Okay, right. So another domain where where this amplitude envelope plays a role, this is just something I want to mention to you as well, to be aware of that another domain where this plays a role is in theories that try or like theories about human speech perception, where the amplitude envelope plays a central role in how speech is fundamentally segmented into chunks for syllables before we then put these syllables together to words and to more complex units and give it a semantics and so on and so forth. And there was a very influential paper in 2012 by Giraud and Pöppel, who actually showed that this pulsing in the amplitude envelope is also something that we find in a brain as a sort of neural energy oscillation, even in a resting state of a brain. So you have to think of it that all our brains, basically, they are constantly sort of oscillating energy. And this energy basically that oscillates at different bands, but there is one band that oscillates at more or less the exact same frequency as the syllabic chunks that we have in the amplitude envelope. Yeah, and that was when they assumed that, well, the amplitude envelope might be a cue for chunking that signal and might be a cue that then the brain entrains to with this natural rhythm, this neural rhythm that it produces, that it entrains to that amplitude envelope, and that this is basically a fundamental sampling of the speech signal of the most fundamental information, basically, that we get, like sort of some sort of speech chunks over time, basically. Yeah, and that is a model that is still very dominant in speech perception, and people looking at this from all sorts of perspectives, and also found that yes, when speakers speak faster or slower or different rhythm, in like rhythmically different, that actually listeners entrain to this, and this is why it is believed that the brain basically is somehow trying to adapt a sampling mechanism to these particular envelope structures. Yeah? But I think in particular, when we look at this type of application, that there is a problem involved here. And the problem is that there is a really strong influence of natural environments on speech temporal information, in particular the amplitude envelope and the temporal fine structure. Yeah. So natural environments, I mean, so-called, or more specifically in acoustics, I mean, so-called LTI systems. They're linear time invariant systems. So basically anything that is linear and time invariant. So for example, just cavities, if I put my hands in front of my mouth, then my speech signal is modified by my hands. Basically, it sounds differently. So the hands are an LTI system, is a natural environment that modifies the information. If I talk against the wall here and the speech signal comes back, it sounds slightly different than when I talk into the open room. So the wall is basically an LTI system changing the speech signal, and it changes the temporal information. And what it changes basically a lot is the phases of the individual components in the signal, and also the amplitude envelope. So when I talk against the wall, signal comes back, then temporal fine structure might look totally different, because of lots of random phase changes that we get in the individual components of the signal. And the amplitude envelope might also be completely different depending in what situation. Maybe not right from a wall, talking against the wall, but if I talk through my hands, for example, if I cup my hands in front of my mouth and I talk through the hands, and probably at home you can hear then that my voice changes a little bit, and that also leads to a change in the strong changes in the amplitude envelope. But then there is one information of these three that we looked at before that is indestructible, and that is the periodicity information in here. And I then thought, well, maybe for the processing of a speech signal, maybe what we are paying more attention to, or what is more relevant, is actually that periodicity. So basically, the fundamental chunking into periodic and aperiodic information. And when you look at that, we have that in speech signals anyway that we find that we get a very high periodicity at the syllable nucleus, typically, where the vowels are most canonical, where they have the highest amplitude, and we get very strong periodicity. But then between the syllable nuclei, typically we get all sorts of consonants, we get sort of rapid changes in the articulators, and that leads to a lot of aperiodicity between the vowel peaks. So basically, what might be plausible is that actually this temporal structure of speech, whether we are dealing with a vowel nucleus that is at a higher amplitude, and whether we are dealing with the information or sort of the transient information between two vowel nuclei, that this is more encoded in really non-destructible information like periodicity. Periodicity is basically an LTI system, can't do anything about it. It will never change. You can only change that with nonlinear systems. Mostly in the digital domain, there are a few natural environments like the Doppler effect, for example, where we have periodicity changes. Whether that is a system involved or so, might be debatable. So question that I want to ask here is how closely is the periodicity information actually related to the amplitude envelope? And let's have a look at that. So what I did here is calculating the so-called harmonics to noise ratio or harmonicity. And the harmonics to noise ratio, I'm going to call it harmonicity in the remainder of the talk. I think it's basically a little formula. You just divide the signal by the noise, log it to the base 10, and then multiply it by 10. I measured this signal to noise ratio in 60 milliseconds frames. So basically took a frame through run a window through the signal, and for every window 60 milliseconds I calculated the harmonicity and then plotted the harmonicity over time. This is an algorithm that you can find in Pratt. If you look at the Pratt help, you also get more information about that particular algorithm for calculating harmonicity. And there are two factors basically that contribute to that harmonicity. One is the jittering of the pitch periods. If you remember, jittering is like the differences between the individual period durations. Whether you have long pitch periods following, or long fundamental frequency periods, we could say, like followed by shorter ones, followed by longer, followed by shorter. So we get this phenomenon of so-called jittering. And that contributes to the periodicity, or as we say, harmonicity of the vocalic signal. And then also the degree of period similarity, meaning like sort of how much background noise is in there, how much fine structure noise do you get into these individual periods that make them look different from each other. And there is one, sorry, let me get that on the screen fully. There is one interesting factor that we have to be aware of looking at this harmonicity as a function of so-called signal to noise ratio, that if we have a very clean signal that you can see here with a signal to noise ratio, like here is on top, we have a signal here where no noise is added. You see the harmonics sticking out really nicely. And then you see here one at a signal to noise ratio of minus 50 decibels, where a lot of noise is added. The signal is actually very low. The noise is dominating. I think actually the minus should be the other way around. There's minus 150 and plus 50. But no, sorry, it's right. It's correct. The signal is signal is stronger, so that it's minus 50 anyway. So here you see one in the middle at 0 decibels, where there is we have a still strong harmonics, but considerable noise there. And we see that there is like here I plotted the harmonics to noise ratio over the signal to noise ratio, and we see that there is a point basically, obviously these points correspond. So at 0 signal to noise ratio, we always get a 0 harmonics to noise ratio. But as we get lower in the signal to noise ratio, we actually don't change anymore in the harmonicity, the harmonic symmetry. So that remains basically at 0. And if we increase the signal here up to 90 decibels, close to 100 here, then we find also that if we go over 100, we cannot increase the harmonicity anymore. So that the harmonicity basically is like operates between these two extremes of 0 and something like around 100, close to 100 signal to noise ratio. So as I said before, then like here 2 slides before, as I said, like I used this formula to calculate the harmonicity in each like in 60 millisecond frames, and then interpolated the mean of that I got from these frames and plotted them as a contour here over time. And here we see the so-called harmonicity contour then of that particular signal here that I showed before, also in the very beginning. Yeah, so that's the harmonicity contour based on where we get a peak. The signal is utmost harmonic. Whenever we get a trough, the signal is utmost non-harmonic. Yeah, contains a lot of noise and aperiodicity. Okay, so now I plotted on top of this, now superimposed here, the red line is the amplitude envelope for that particular, for this harmonicity contour. And we can see that, well, the peaks somehow correspond mostly. Yeah. So we see whenever we get a peak in the harmonicity contour, we also get a peak in the amplitude envelope. But the peaks in the harmonicity contour are much more pronounced. No, we can see much more clearly where these peaks are, and we can distinguish one peak from the other. While in the amplitude envelope, sometimes it's difficult to decide here: is that a sub peak that belongs to a peak next to it, or is that its own peak again? And we see basically that, but apart from that, the position of the peaks pretty well correspond. But that is a first evidence, maybe, that we can see a visual evidence. We see, well, somehow in the harmonicity contour, this fundamental structure is much more pronounced and probably easier to obtain than from the amplitude envelope. So we looked at this phenomenon here before, removing the amplitude envelope. So I gave you this Hilbert temporal fine structure and the infinite peak clipped signal where we removed the entire amplitude envelope. And what I'm going to do now is basically get the harmonicity contour from this signal where the amplitude envelope has been removed. So basically in that signal here, the broadband amplitude envelope is non-existent anymore, but based on the periodicity that we have, both in the Hilbert and the infinitely peak clipped signal, we should be able to actually get back that same amplitude envelope, sorry, that same harmonicity contour here in black that we obtained from the intact signal. Yeah. And here is what you here is basically the curves that you see. So this is the harmonicity contour from the clean speech signal. This is the harmonicity contour from the temporal fine structure signal. So the one where we used the Hilbert transforms, and the temporal fine structure is still there, but the amplitude envelope is missing. And we get pretty much the same contour back. And here we get the harmonicity contour from the infinitely peak clipped signal. And again, we see that we can reconstruct the harmonicity contour pretty well. So basically that means even though we may lose the entire amplitude envelope in a signal fully, no, I mean, here, like in that demonstration, we use like a pretty strong method for doing this. In reality, of course, we would never have such strong changes in the signal. But even if we get rid of it fully, we can still, from the resulting signals, we can still reconstruct the envelope contour, the harmonicity contour, basically here, the harmonicity envelope. We can still reconstruct that based on that temporal fine structure that is in that signal. So just for you to see, I also plotted the envelope on top of that. So the amplitude envelope in red here again from the temporal fine structure signal and from the IPC signal, and you pretty much see that this is more or less like a much flatter line with a sort of random up and down, and the peaks don't correspond anymore to the peaks we had previously in the amplitude envelope of that signal. So basically, that has to be the case naturally, because of course we lost that information from the amplitude envelope. We cannot reconstruct the amplitude envelope from that signal anymore. Yeah. And the same thing applies for the infinitely peak clip signal here, the second one. Yeah, we get sort of more or less random up and down of that contour. So probably we can think of that more like a flat line. So how well now does the harmonicity contour predict the envelope? I run a bunch of sentences here, utterances from the timid corpus that probably most of you know, Texas Instrument MIT corpus that was built, I guess, in the 80s for speaker recognition purposes, is a database that contains American English speech. Each speaker reads 10 sentences from many dialect regions of America. So I took 15 speakers here and randomly selected from 8 dialect regions of US English, and I took 8 unique utterances per speaker. So we have 8 times 15 is 120 utterances in total then. And with this material, I extracted the envelope and the harmonicity contour from non-manipulated signals and from the temporal fine structure and the IPC and the infinitely peak clip signals. No? So to see then how well does the envelope correlate with the harmonicity contour, the amplitude envelope correlate with the harmonicity contour. And then, yeah, step C was then to correlate them. It was Pearson correlation, simple Pearson correlation, correlated the envelope with the harmonicity contour for all these different conditions. And the results of this, you can see here that the correlation of the amplitude envelope with the harmonicity contour is pretty high. Yeah, so it's higher than 0.8. So it's not close to 1 here, but it's considerable correlation. So basically, most of the information that we have in the amplitude envelope is also in the harmonicity contour. Yeah. And here I correlated the envelope with the harmonicity contour obtained from the temporal fine structure signal, and here in the middle from the IPC signal. We see that the correlations go down a bit, so we lose some information indeed here, so from the original envelope, but we still see a considerable correlation here around 0.5, meaning that also these contours here, the harmonicity contours from the amplitude envelope, so from the temporal fine structure and IPC signals that have no amplitude envelope anymore, they still contain considerable information about the amplitude envelope. And here we correlated the amplitude envelope with the amplitude envelope obtained from the temporal fine structure, just to see as some sort of control condition that, of course, envelope obtained from the temporal fine structure, there's no envelope in there anymore, and we also get close to 0 correlation here. Yeah, so there is no information in that envelope from amplitude envelope from the temporal fine structure. You might say, yeah, okay, how can there be? Of course, there can't, and but the result just confirms this, just to make sure that this is really the case. Then I built a noise vocoder with the different, to play the signals using the different harmonicity contours instead of the amplitude envelope. And that noise vocoder is also available. It's a sort of beta version. It's a bit in progress, but if anyone wants to play around with it, please write to me. I can send it to you, and you can create signals with this using a harmonicity contour. So basically, taking a speech signal, take the harmonicity, calculate the harmonicity contour, and fill the harmonicity contour with noise by multiplying that harmonicity contour envelope by noise. Here I said E and V, but sorry, don't mistake, that was amplitude envelope. That is the harmonicity contour envelope down here in D, that then is then multiplied with the noise. And I did the specific vocoding that I did here. I prepared a bunch of examples for you to listen to. The specific vocoding that I produced here is with 4 bands, 6 bands, and 9 bands vocoding. And the speech bands reach from 80 to 8020 hertz. And as a band spacing, I used the so-called Greenwood method, and as a filter type, a gamma tone filter. But those are details, basically, what we actually don't need for now. But the overall bandwidth of the signal was basically from 80 to 8020 hertz. And here are examples. For example, when we look at a signal here of the, like in red, again, sorry, now I changed the colors actually. I see, so red is the harmonicity contour, black is the amplitude envelope, this time from band 1, band 2, band 3, band 4, band 5, and band 6 in a 6-band vocoded signal. And we see there is a sort of high resemblance again between in particular the position of the peaks and the signals. And I can play you what that sounds like, a 4-band signal vocoded with the harmonicity contour. Anyone understood this? I guess no. Then 6 bands, that should be slightly better. Oh, and now we have this stupid. How can I play this without the? Okay, and now 9 bands. I really should have placed them differently. Anyone understand something? You want to put it in the chat if you think you understand something. It's an English sentence. Anything? I play you the no comes here. Okay, so no intelligibility, nothing. Okay, right. I play you the envelope signals just so that you can something like people. Absolutely, yeah. 9 bands seems better, but I still can't understand. It does. There's a bunch of articles actually. If you're interested, I can send you the references there. They show that. Of course, if you are not familiar with these type of signals, they are really difficult to understand. The intelligibility is very low. No? So if you practice with these signals a bit over a few days only, maybe, then you will find that these signals are actually very intelligible. Interestingly, all this research about the vocoding and number of bands you use, that was all basically performed in connection with the development of so-called cochlear implants. Because in cochlear implants, you have a very similar situation, and people assume that actually the signals that we hear here, that these signals are probably very much resembling the acoustic world that people carrying a cochlear implant actually perceive. Yeah? So cochlear implants are now, I think, at around, we get them at around 14 bands, but you can imagine that if like previous version where we had them with 9 bands, 6 bands, or 4 bands, that would have more or less been the acoustic world that you would have, or the acoustic detail that you would have perceived. It might have sounded very differently in terms of the sound quality, but the amount of detail in there is probably very similar. So I play it to you with the amplitude envelope. Anyone understands more? And I play you the 6-band vocoded. Oops. Sorry. Anything now? 9-band envelope. Elderly people are often exploited. Very, very close. Yes, very good. This is the original. I play it to you.
Elderly people are often excluded.
So excluded instead of exploited, but that was super close. Of course, it's just a little detail that was elderly people are often excluded. Yeah, I'll play it again so you can hear the original again.
Elderly people are often excluded.
And once you know that, it's probably impossible not to hear it anymore. I play you now the 9 bands noise vocoded harmonicity contour. Yeah, so it's probably difficult now not to hear it, I guess. And the 9-band envelope from the amplitude envelope again. Yeah, but somehow the envelope sounds probably slightly better than the harmonicity contour, and I'm going to tell you soon why I think that's the case. Yeah. So when we remove the envelope at each band prior to the processing, so from like basically have every band either do a temporal fine obtain the temporal fine structure or the infinitely peak clipped signal, and then we vocode, yeah, with the harmonicity contour, then that is obviously a more difficult step again, but I'm going to play it to you. So that's the harmonicity contour obtained from the different bands, but without an amplitude envelope, so fully relying on harmonicity, and then you get this here. Now that is more or less just noise now, but you can get a little bit of the elderly people are often excluded. I'll play it again for you. Yeah, we can still hear that probably something is there, but probably that wouldn't be enough for intelligent to get some intelligibility if we didn't know what the sentence was, what the utterance was before. No, so and here we have now harmonicity contour from the infinitely peak clipped signal. Very similar, but just to give you a demonstration, if we take the envelope from signals where we remove the envelope, again, it's a little bit of a funny condition, because if we remove the envelope, how can that work? But when we also hear it doesn't work here. Yeah, so we just get a noise. So there is rudimentary information remaining in the harmonicity contour, but not in the envelope after we remove these envelopes, of course, and we can use such information to reconstruct at least some bits of some acoustic details of the signal. So why are these signals not so well intelligible if we base them on the harmonicity contour? Well, you see that here, if we actually correlate the envelope in a 4-band decoding with either the harmonicity contour from the temporal fine structure, or the harmonicity contour from the infinitely peak clipped signal, then we see actually that with increasing frequency bands, so with the higher frequency bands, the correlations go down. Yeah, so the higher frequency bands don't contain so much information about the amplitude envelope in the harmonicity contour anymore. And why is that? Well, of course, in higher frequency bands, we get more noisy signals. We actually, in terms of speech, if you think what is between like 5,000, 6,000 and 8,000 hertz, which was probably our upper band, maybe a little bit more. So if we think of that, there is mostly like consonantal content, like fricatives, s, sh, and all sorts of frication noise. And obviously, this frication does not contain any harmonicity, so it cannot contribute well to an amplitude, to a harmonicity contour in that higher frequency range. And this is why these correlations also go down, meaning basically that the harmonicity contour is probably strongest for obtaining relevant information in the lower frequency areas. Yeah. So I also did that with 6-band. It's a little bit redundant, but you just to see that, like, also with 6-band, we see there's a pretty strong decrease from the lower to the higher frequency bands. In the lower frequency bands, correlation is really high, and then from the second band on, it keeps on going down until we get very poor correlations in the 6-band. But as I said, that are mostly noisy. Here again, that's the somehow funny condition where we correlate the envelope obtained with the envelope from signals that don't have any envelope. Of course, we don't get any correlations. And here, that is the envelope, the correlation between the envelope and 6 bands from the harmonicity contour when the signal is intact, like in a clean signal. And there we see that actually the correlations are reasonably high. So after we lose envelope information in different bands, actually the information that remains is really in the lower frequency areas. Okay, then we carried out, it's like, how much time do we still have? Because I see like that it's now, I mean, here it's 4 o'clock. I think with you, it should be 11. And the organizers told me it should be about 40 minutes to an hour, and I'm not sure, about 1 minute. All right, okay. So I quickly give you the perception experiment that we run on this, just the results basically, and then we can finish this off. And basically, we calculated information transfer for consonants in human listeners, where we got manner, place, and voice information in A consonant A nonsense words, and we did that for labiodental contrasts F and V, P and B, alveolus and Z, and so on and so forth, with 4, 6, and 9 band vocoding, and doing that with a harmonicity contour and the envelope. And we had 16 listeners of German for that, and we always found that, well, if we do the information transfer here for the, oh, now I forgot to put the labels on the graphs. I'm really sorry, but that must be the fricatives left, the plosives. So for the fricatives and the plosives, we actually see that we get much more information transfer for the envelopes, the amplitude envelopes, and the harmonicity contour is very poor. And for the nasals, actually, we get somehow we get about the same information transfer, which makes sense because they are harmonic signals and contain more information than that's about the amplitude envelope. So conclusions and questions here, we have the harmonicity contour. Basically, I would say they contain a fair amount of envelope information. The advantage is that the periodicity lends itself as an information carrier because it cannot be distorted by an LTI system. So the envelope is very liable, the amplitude envelope is very liable to distortion. So the harmonicity contour basically is something that we can really rely on for amplitude, for the fundamental structure of speech. And questions are now, well, are there auditory and cognitive processes that might profit from or rely on this harmonicity contour information? For example, segmentation of the speech signal. Do we actually rely on that, on the harmonicity, sort of more or less signal being more or less harmonic? I can already answer that question that, like, with a no. Basically, it's like we don't fully rely on it because we can also do harmonic vocoded speech if we vocode speech signal with a harmonic source, and just by applying the amplitude envelopes, of course, we also get intelligible signals back. But but these signals also are very difficult actually to maintain against background noise and so on and so forth. So, and other examples for the processing of temporal information and hearing in the perception of speech rhythm. Yeah, so different applications that we might have. And another question is, are harmonicity contour and amplitude envelope related to the auditory cognitive domain? For example, do loudness levels differ in harmonic signals of the same intensity with and without noise? So meaning, if we add some noise kit, is actually our perceived loudness depending on that harmonicity as well? And I could well imagine that in the audiology domain that people have maybe have looked at that already sporadically, but I haven't found any evidence so far myself. So as conclusion again, and here is that when you remember these two results here, the harmonicity contour across the envelope, across the frequency bands, that in the lower frequency band, we have more robust information from the harmonicity contour. In the higher frequency bands, we have less robust information from the envelope contour. So it's reasonable to believe that maybe the harmonicity contour is more relevant for that fundamental rhythmic prosodic structuring of speech rather than for higher frequency information. And that would be the end of my talk. Sorry if it was turned out a little bit long, but thanks very much for listening. Thanks very much for having me here again. And maybe I should turn on the camera again for the questions, no? Let me see, where is my... Here, so... Right. I hope it wasn't too dry, because it's always difficult to talk just in front of an empty computer screen, not seeing anyone, no? But... I also, before you ask the question, maybe I'll put the link to the slides in the chat, yeah? All right, yeah. But anyway, here it is. If anyone wants to download the slides, I just put it in the chat and you're welcome to. Okay.
All right, Volker, thank you very much for your presentation. It was amazing. In fact, and it made me feel very curious, because these days I'm running an experiment on voice disguise, degree of foreign accent for the forensic purposes. And the disguise that made very prominent results were based on laryngealized voice, something like, "Hey, how you doing?" So like this.
Yeah.
And have you ever, during these experiments on harmonicity, contour, as well as the clipped version and the Hilbert filter, have you tried anything on laryngealized voice, glottalized voice, something like in a vocal fry, if the information is actually maintained, as well as the rhythmic and the prosodic information, these kinds of voice quality? This is it really caught me very interested about it, because
yeah. Short answer is no, I haven't done it yet, but the longer answer would be really interesting to do. And I think it's definitely something, of course, like if we take a signal that is heavily laryngalized with a speaker that has like a very, very sort of rough, creaky vocal fry voice quality, then probably we would get much lower periodicity. I assume that still the differences between the periodic and aperiodic, the relative differences between periodic and aperiodic parts would still be maintained. But of course, that is definitely something to look at.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got another one.
Okay.
I'm going to answer. I'm going to ask it. This is actually about one of the metrics you've proposed. Let me try to make the link with that. You've proposed, I believe, some years ago, the proportion for voiced speech. All right. So I don't know exactly if you can make a link with that, but can we take, for example, depending on everything, I'll talk. I'm trying to apply this into foreign language context, right? And if we get, for example, different proportions, and if we run harmonicity contour in this clipping, eliminating the amplitude envelope and maintaining actually harmonicity, I really, because I can't see it now very clear, but how would we have changes in the proportion of voiced speech into these terms? I mean, I run the to get the measures of voice proportion inside a language, and then I just apply this kind of technique. Would we have different results? I mean, probably you've already tested it. You suggested it, in fact. So,
yeah. No, actually, so the differences in voicing and unvoicing, they remain the same after the, let me go back on the slide actually to slide where at the beginning, let's see. Oh, I have so many windows on a pretty small computer screen right now, but it's so when you have like a signal like this, and you turn that into either an infinitely peak clipped signal or into a Hilbert temporal fine structure signal, we would actually find that the periodicity remains the same, and this is precisely why I'm assuming that is a really strong cue, to the fundamental structure of the signal. That is a strong cue that might even be used in hearing, but it definitely, I think, it should be used in the perception and interpretation of speech signals. That we might pay more attention to the parts that are more harmonic, and then we sort of get the information in between as sort of additional information to define what it is that is in the harmonic part, and what is in the harmonic part is the vowels in the end. So that harmonicity basically helps us to locate those vocalic parts, to identify the vowels, and also identify at what rate and what positions they are occurring. So I would say that is something that, if you mix that with other noise, or so that is really highly maintained, in the signal. And even, as I said, if you getting rid of the actual envelopes and the actual amplitudes there.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Now, I think that's a super cool question, and it's funny. Coincidentally, I'm at a language evolution workshop here right now, from where I'm giving the talk. So it fits well into the other topic that is going on here, and so it's no. I've thought about that a little bit, but I would say that if you look at many animal species, they probably don't have these complex changes between harmonic, aharmonic content in their signal. If you think of birds, for example, their content is fully harmonic, and they probably do most with pitch. So the bird songs is up and down in pitch, and complex pitch contours and stuff. But probably the amplitude envelope is not contributing much there, if at all, and a harmonicity contour would be rather flat for birds. If you think of dog bark, for example, those are harmonic events that start maybe with a little aperiodicity, but then it's mainly harmonic, as are many sort of primate sounds, like monkey, ape vocalizations that are often fully harmonic and have actually no consonantal content. So I would say that this complex interaction between harmonic, non-harmonic parts of the signal, that this is probably something that is specific to human speech, no? And maybe it's even something where we could go back and say like, oh, that is actually something that by which human speech distinguished itself from animal speech, no, or sort of animal vocalizations rather than speech, no. But that's the human vocalization started distinguishing themselves from animal vocalization, and that then this turned into more complex arrangements that we find now in contemporary speech signals. No, I think that's a fantastic thought. I'm happy to put that into the round here at the language evolution workshop. If I get some good answers, I'll send them to you afterwards. But I think it's a good thought and a nice hypothesis actually. Yeah. Thank you.
Very much.
Well, thanks very much. Also from my side, again, it was really a pleasure to be here and present this to you. And any other ideas you come up with or any material you need from the talk, anything, just write to me, and I'm happy to help you on with anything. Okay, cool. Thanks. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks, Maria Ole.